This is the Coordination Tax, a podcast about what actually breaks down when teams stop sharing the same reality. I'm Christian Luoma, co-founder at In Parallel, and every episode I sit down with somebody who's lived through a mess of keeping organizations aligned. Today, my guest, Robert D. Siegel, is actually better than that. He's been also teaching how the management theory actually works at Stanford GSB. He is a partner at XSeed Capital and an author of two amazing books. One of them recently was released, The Systems Leader, and we're going to talk about some of those topics in that book. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Christian. It's great to see you and always wonderful to reconnect.
Likewise. So you were a part of the research team when Andy Grove put together the Only the Paranoid Survives. Is that correct?
That is correct. Andy was one of my professors when I was a student at Stanford. And then when I went to Intel and he decided to write the book, he asked me to do his research. So I was a young person with hair that was quite long. It was a long time ago, but it was one of my great professional experiences.
I bet, that's an envious position to be. And sort of when I was reading through The Systems Leader, I was thinking about the parallels towards that moment. And maybe we'll pick up from there. Why do you think we need a different thesis than in 1996 when that book aired out?
When Andy wrote about and Only the Paranoid Survive, he described an experience that he called strategic inflection points.
Mm-hmm.
And an inflection point in math is when the second derivative of a curve goes from convex to concave or vice versa. Basically, this big fundamental 10x change in your universe. And how do you handle those moments? And Andy was arguing that those are the moments where you get real disruption, and real disruption in a business and in an industry. When I was teaching the course, The Systems Leader, with my the boss after Andy, Jeff Immelt, the former CEO of GE, we were studying about 100 different companies and leaders. And what we were finding was that leaders were in a world of constant crisis and increasingly rapid technological change. And no matter what, things were kind of constantly coming at them. And they felt like they were being pulled in opposite directions on things that I call cross pressures, where you're supposed to do A and B. If you do A, you can't do B. And if you do B, you're going to get canceled for not doing A.
Right.
And so leaders were feeling like they were constantly bombarded with these really, really difficult things, not once in a decade, like Andy described, but it seemed like every day.
Yeah.
And how do they lead themselves and their teams through these difficult times? And that's where we came up with the framework of systems leadership as a way to address these challenges that vex modern leaders who are running their companies.
Great. And indeed, you describe 5 different tensions primarily there as cross pressures, as you outline. When are we supposed to choose what direction do we lean on? Because it is really difficult to be strong and empathetic when you're doing layoffs, to give an example.
So for the listeners and for the viewers, these cross pressures that I described, there are many of them that we face in business. The 5 that we identified the most, you talked about one of them there, which is people. How do we, show strength and hold people accountable, but also be empathetic? The other 4 that I talk about in the book are first and foremost priorities. How do I execute and innovate? Sphere of influence. How do I think about internal and external from a company standpoint? Geography, local and global. And then finally, purpose. How do I balance my own personal ambitions as an individual with being a statesman or a stateswoman or a steward of my organization? And I think you hit on the key point, Christian. It's not about choosing. It's about embracing both. That this is what I think, that in order to get through these times, we have to actually have both of these capabilities and competencies inside of ourselves. And I think previously, sometimes these capabilities existed inside of an organization, but in separate groups. So, for example, you might have had to deal with execution and innovation. You had the team that made the trains run on time, then the crazy long hairs who did the innovation.
Yeah.
Well, now because technology is moving so quickly, we need to do both. To your point about people, how do I be strength and empathetic? There was a great leader I studied, Kathy Mazzarella. She runs a company here in the United States called Graybar. They're the former Western Electric. They do a lot of components and parts for data centers. Kathy's very strong. Like, she's
Yeah.
one of these leaders that when she walks into a room, we all sit up a little bit straighter. Know this?
Yeah,
But
I
she's
know the type.
very kind and very human. And
Mm,
it's kind of that false choice, right? She knows that if she's got a performance problem in front of her, what's going through her mind are two questions. The hard part, do I have a skill set mismatch? But also the empathetic part, is there something going on in this person's life that I need to know about that's preventing them from being effective? For her, these are, two truths that she can hold and say, all right, what's going on here so I can be the most effective leader that I
mm.
can be at this moment?
It is a tall order, but then again, you were, teaching this systems leadership course with Jeff Immelt, who also, obviously one of the greats in the history. What did being in the room with Jeff teach you about leadership that maybe you applied in the book as well?
It's, on the personal side, I worked for Jeff, and then when we collaborated on the class, I got to see Jeff go from the highest highs to the lowest lows.
Yeah,
For 15 years, he was one of the greatest CEOs in the world,
for sure.
CEO of the year many, many times. And then he became the dumbest CEO ever in the history of the universe and somebody who destroyed a great American company. And I watched him go through that.
Mm,
What I think I took away from it was Jeff always conducted himself with a grace and dignity, even when he was being vilified in the press.
right.
He never complained. And I would get a lot of private moments with him, and he
Mm,
would talk about how it hurt. But I also saw him stand in front of our students when he was being ripped apart by the Wall Street Journal or Fortune, and he would say to them, "Ask me anything."
mhm.
Like, he showed up and it mattered, and
Wow.
what I saw from Jeff was that ability to talk about what he thought he did right and to be proud of what he accomplished, to admit his mistakes, but not to hide, and
Mhm,
to be out there in front at a time when, like, people were not being particularly nice. And Jeff had an amazing network and has an amazing network of leaders that he was friends with, men and women who worked for him at GE, who now run other large organizations around the world, who would all come back to us at Stanford and help us teach our students. And I also saw that importance of friendships
mhm.
and the fact that these people were very, very human. They might have been some of the most wealthy and accomplished people in the world, but in our classroom, they were just normal people talking about how they were running their organizations.
Incredible. That's so well said. I think one of the themes that I have been not on purpose finding through these podcast interviews has been the theme of being grounded, being honest. I have had several guests referring to that. And when I listened to that case example, Jeff had to be grounded. Like he had to
Yeah.
have his own reality while the world was perhaps splitting around him.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, one of the things I talk about in the book, a style of leadership that we see all the time, I call it unserious behaviors in a serious world.
Yeah.
And I identify what some of them are, replacing decorum with outrageousness, focusing on trivial goals, ignoring changes we don't like, acting with disdain for customers. And we see this all the time. And the example I love to give that a lot of people can relate to, Christian, do you remember when Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk were going to fight in a cage match? And
Yeah.
everybody in the world, by the way, this
Yeah.
was in the news everywhere, every
Hmm.
country, every continent.
For sure.
And everybody in the world seemed to have 2 reactions. Number 1, "I'm gonna watch it." And number 2, "This is wrong."
Yes.
Why are 2 of our greatest business leaders talking about doing something like this?
Mm.
And we know why they do it. They get clicks and they get likes,
Yeah.
and they're in the press all the time. And, what I see not only with my young students, but with a lot of my corporate clients around the world or executive education, people ask, "Is that how I'm supposed to lead today? Is
Mm.
that how I'm supposed to be?" Because that's what seems the media puts up for us. And this is like, these are the great leaders and this is how I'm
Hmm.
supposed to behave. And yet we all kind of know that's not right.
No.
And I think one of the ideas behind the systems leader was not only what I was able to witness firsthand with Jeff, but there were 100 plus different leaders that we were able to spend time with and see how they dealt with it.
Mm.
And I think the takeaway that I internalized is, you can choose to be the exact leader that you want to be. And the leaders that I write about in the book are all hugely successful, what they've
Yes.
accomplished, what their companies have accomplished, and yet none of them show those unserious behaviors.
Mm.
We may not read about them all the time, but they're there. And by the way, none of them are perfect. Like they'll admit their mistakes. They talk about when they got things wrong. They talked
Hmm.
about times they failed, but they persevere and they get through those times and they keep going. And that's what I want the readers and hopefully some of our viewers and listeners to take
Yeah,
away, that we can choose to be the leaders that we want to be, not necessarily what the media says, "Hi, this is what great looks like."
incredible. Everybody listening or watching should buy the book immediately. I want to come back to the book, but there's something else that I wanted to touch upon because we're just about to release a piece of research that is still early, but the reason why we labeled the podcast Coordination Tax is that I believe that there's this invisible drain of all the managers today, which is about trying to get everybody on the same picture or same page. And we did a research of 247 managers across 5 countries, and we got a number back that 16.5 hours per week per manager is being spent on coordination overhead before any real work happens. Is this number surprising to you?
I guess I was surprised at its consistency.
Yeah.
By the way, it's really interesting research and having worked both in large companies and small companies, you see the difference in the coordination tax. Like at Stanford, we're a huge sprawling university
Hmm.
and the coordination tax is extreme sometimes. GE and Intel, where I worked, was huge. But as
Yeah.
I also ran several small startups, and as a VC, my coordination tax felt smaller.
Hmm.
And yet when I was reading the research, I was kind of almost like, oh yeah, I get that it is high. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of the digital systems that we put in place, kind of can make things very, very challenging. And sometimes, like, the good news is we're always connected, and the bad news is we're always connected. So
Sure.
I think the coordination tax, I think the tools actually add to the tax, whether
Hmm.
it's Slack or Teams or whatever is the case may be. I think that one of the things that plays into that reminded me of something that I've seen in my research is, one of the lessons I like to talk about is that truth equals
Hmm.
facts plus context. So now facts are facts.
Hmm.
Context is how we understand things. So, in this world of constant crisis and increasingly rapid technological change, we wake up every morning and we look at our phones and we turn on our computers and we say, "Oh my goodness, what happened last night?" Right? And by the way, we're not surprised by anything we see.
Yes.
And so now leaders need to help people make sense of that and help set context.
Mm.
So I think what I, I- you know, what, when I read your research, what went through my head is like, okay, the coordination tax, part of that is, what you're describing, and also the tools and how the tools both help and hurt us.
Yeah.
That adds to the tax. But also we need to help people make sense because we have so much information coming in at us. We've got to spend time explaining to people why this bit of information is important and here's what it means. And so that's, I think, a skill, and leaders need to figure out both how to, we can call it a coordination tax, but it's also part of that system that allows us to communicate and get things done. We just have to figure out where it's being effective and where it's helpful and where it's wasteful.
One of the key themes in your book is managing context, and I want to double click on that term. You sort of already segue there, but I want to touch upon one point about the research that I was stunned by. Intuitively, I knew, but I didn't know how bad things were. When we were researching people who have actively been taking AI into use and
Mhm.
comparing them to the cohort of not so much actively using, it seemed to me that the coordination load was significantly twice as higher or more with the managers that use AI, despite it being sort of like a support for us. How do you explain that?
Well, I'll give you an opinion. I don't have data to back it up, but when I read that, I was wondering the same thing. But then I started thinking about all of my friends in Silicon Valley who've gone insane when it comes to AI. Like
Hmm.
they've tried to automate everything in their life. Well, let's assume that you have a job and you've got things to do. And now you're like, oh my goodness, there's this new thing and I've got to automate everything in my life. And I'm going to create all these agents to automate things for me. Well, remember, the agents need to tap into various data sources.
Right.
And those data sources could be one's calendar, it could be one's, Salesforce, whatever it is you're tapping into. And so what happens is you've then got to create the agent. You've got to make sure that you're training the agent. You've got to check what the agent's giving back to you to make sure it works. That's all tax,
Hmm.
right? And especially at a time when, we're having to learn new tools. The tools, you see with AI that it's not perfect the first time and you have to keep iterating to get it to where you want to do. It's just more work right now. And so what I don't know is this AI, the coordination tax of AI, is it transient or is it endemic to the technology? In other words, will we get better at creating agents where we'll be faster and we'll know how to do things? And I don't know, but I wasn't, surprised because like if you've created agents or if you're using AI, like it takes a lot of time to get what you need. Now, you might get better output later. But,
Yeah,
you gotta put time investing in the system to get it the way you want it to be.
right. And I was thinking exactly the similar things. It feels like we've almost accelerated the sort of decay of reality, those built realities that exist already today with today's tools, as you pointed out earlier. So let's jump to that managing context. If truth equals facts plus context, and obviously that's amazing statement, by the way, because like your truth can be different from mine because I don't have the context. Sometimes that's a good thing, but like more often than not, when you're leading and managing people, you want to bring people to be a part of your context so
Yeah.
that they see the same priorities. Is that a simplification of managing context, or how would you describe?
Well, you just said something really interesting, which is this notion of people can have different truths.
Yeah.
And the first time that hit me, um, was not kind of this notion of, well, my truth is whatever, because I think that's a very narcissistic perspective. Because in
Mm,
theory, truth should be truth.
yeah.
But if you're familiar with Wikipedia, all right,
Hmm.
let's back up before the Stone Ages. Do you remember Encyclopedia Britannica?
Yeah.
All right, so
All the
y
editions. Yeah.
okay, right, all the editions of Encyclopedia Britannica, and if you were reading the Finnish version of Encyclopedia Britannica, and you were reading about the automobile,
Hmm.
what you would read in Finnish and what I would read in English would be the same.
Yeah.
Different words, because 'cause you're reading in your native language and I'm reading in my native language, but the
Mm,
content is the same. If you think about Wikipedia, which completely destroyed, basically, encyclopedias, what's interesting about Wikipedia, because everything is run by the individuals who create it up, what might be on your finished page on what's in the
mm,
automobile could be completely different than what's on my page in English about the automobile. So all of a sudden, now we sit back and say, what's truth? What you read in Finnish about the
hmm.
automobile or what I read in English about the automobile? And a
Yeah.
lot of that gets to the context of who were the writers.
Mm.
Now, there's that old saying, whoever, wins the wars gets to write the history, right? About what
True.
happened.
Yeah.
I think the notion of truth equals facts plus context when we apply it to business
Mm,
is, to me, it's less about truth. It's about helping people figure out signal from noise.
right.
And like, okay, so we're now in a land war in Western Europe that's
Mm,
in its 5th year that's lasted longer than the First World War. What does that mean? What does that
yeah.
mean for somebody running a company?
Mm,
What are the dynamics that are playing out because of it? And I think today's business leaders need to understand national issues, geopolitical issues, as well as economic issues, because everything is so intertwined. And
yeah.
that's what I mean by understanding context.
Mhm,
That today, as leaders, we need to kind of help people figure out, look, here's 100 data points. Think about your phone. Your phone's constantly going off with
mhm.
notifications and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But there's like 3 notifications that matter.
Mhm.
Your mom called, your spouse called, or your doctor called, right? Like, those are the ones you need to pay attention to. And
Yes.
how do we figure out, like, no, focus here. These are the
Mm,
things that matter. And that's where I think business leaders need to, like, be able to guide their teams and say, yeah, we can get distracted by a lot of this stuff. Let's make sure that we understand what's important. Here are the facts.
mhm.
Here's the context. Here's what we've got to focus on. And that's the spirit behind truth equals facts plus context.
I do agree wholeheartedly. What I've been thinking as of late, as you may remember, I started a company which was related to strategy execution, and we had to disband that propositional positioning for a whole variety of reasons. First of all, it was an organization problem, not an individual problem. But we also came to realize that, or at least for our opinion, one of the key reasons why execution doesn't happen to the liking of the leaders is that we are lacking shared context, we're lacking a shared lens. And as we've been progressing, what I'm trying to form a thesis on is that, are we going to have a similar strategy execution structures or management structures in the future, given all that you said, because it's so much more dynamic, and it's a matter of placing bets. It's a matter of having a shared lens of like what's important and what's not. How do you view all of this in the age of AI? Are we going to have a similar management structures? A loaded big question, I guess, but
It's so funny you say that. I wrote a Substack post over a year ago about what is truth, right, in this. And
yeah.
I didn't my wife and I did one of these trips of a lifetime. We went to Africa to see the animals. And we're at dinner one night talking to another young couple, and as AI was really taking off,
Hmm.
we were talking about how, you're out there with these cameras and you take these, amazing pictures. And I had a camera that had a speed lens on it, and so I was, taking pictures at rapid paces. And he was saying, "This is great because you can take a picture." Let's say I have a picture of a cheetah or like 10 pictures, and I can like take, like, if I've got one part that's a little bit
Hmm.
blurry here, I can drop it in. And we have these capabilities on our phones,
Yeah.
best shot, where like if somebody's got their eyes closed, they can put the eyes in. And then I wondered, well, yeah, if I take a picture of that and I put it up on my wall at home
Hmm.
and it was created by AI, did it really happen? Like the picture that I put up there of this beautiful animal,
mm,
I never really saw that, right? And is
yeah.
that bad or good?
Hmm.
Is the picture up to be art, and is art meant to be a representation of reality?
Mm,
Or is it supposed to be, no, this is what reality was? And I think in AI that becomes harder and harder and harder. You look at these, things that we see online. We were talking before the camera started about the World Cup,
yeah.
and there have been some amazingly fun videos, in my Instagram feed that are created where you've got the players Harry Kane and Holland and everybody else, all of these amazing stuff that's being done, and you're like, "Wow, that's really good." And they're funny and they're entertaining and sometimes they're heart tugging,
Mm,
and so you wonder, like, you kinda looks at it, it's kinda real.
yeah.
I think
It's
that's
plausible.
and that's kind of, I think, the challenge in a time of AI.
Mm,
Yeah, and I think people need to be discerning
yeah.
and, be asking, like, "Does this make sense?" And that's where I think human judgment still comes in.
Sure.
And I think that's an important role that we'll have to play as a species, and
Mm,
and and people need to do their best to be wise. And by the way, that's the role of leaders,
yeah.
is to help people understand, no, no, this is propaganda, this is
Mm.
highly edited, this is not real, and then help people kind of understand that and not lose sight of what did the machines do versus what do we do as humans.
Absolutely agreed. And nothing is more valuable nowadays, at least in my work, than having debates with my colleagues, because that's where we form a
Mhm.
shared context and then are able to run the company with it. Um, so, if a CEO handed you this report tomorrow morning and asked, "What do I do differently on Monday?" What would you say?
The first step is to um, be very aware of what's signal and what's noise. What's an overhead tax and coordination tax that's important, and what's stuff that's like not as important. One of the takeaways that I've learned from a lot of the great leaders, especially as we get more senior inside of companies, it gets, you're so much demands for your time,
Yeah.
and you have to learn how to say no to things. And so
Mm,
people kind of need to learn to control their schedule and say, yeah, no, no, I'm not going to go to that meeting. And the more senior you get inside of an organization, that's harder and harder because, like, people want you there, and you're gonna make somebody angry when you choose not to go to a meeting.
yeah.
And so, like, and you can't keep everybody happy. So
Mm,
the first thing I would say is I would ask people to look at their calendars and say, be honest with yourself about where you're spending your time. So I did this recently.
yeah.
I looked at my calendar, and because I use Gemini for a lot of stuff. I have numerous
Mm,
Google accounts and Google calendars. And I asked them to do an analysis, okay, in the last 6 months between these calendars, where have I spent my time? Now, I'm very religious, about, like, color coordinating,
yeah.
what my thing is, what's my consulting, what's my teaching, what's my personal time, certain companies that I spend more time with, like my venture business, that's there. And it gave me a really good analysis of where I'm spending my time. And then I said, "Good, please do the same analysis and go back over the last 6 years and show me the trends."
Mm,
And so the first thing I had was I was able to say, "Okay, I kind of understand where I've been spending my time. I had to make sure, by the way, there was some ground truth. It was up to me
Right.
to make sure
Yeah.
my calendars were accurate. And then I could ask myself, well, where should I be spending my time?
Mm.
So my counsel to somebody, if they read this report, is kind of what's important in your business. Are you spending your time on those things? And where's the time you're going to stop spending your time? What, especially as we get more senior inside of companies, your teams are watching you
Mm.
to see where you spend your time, because that's a signal to everybody of what you think is important.
Yes.
And so given that that's the case, we have to step back and say, okay, what are the variables? I'd like to say the variables with the largest coefficients. What are the big X's in our equation?
Yeah.
And that's where we should spend our time, not only because that's what's important for your business, but it also sends a message to your teams of what's important.
Incredible. Robert, thank you for taking the report seriously and for your views. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Where can people find the Systems Leader book and follow your work?
Well, Christian, it's great to speak with you again. By the way, I loved the report. I think it's very, very important. And so thank you for doing it for all of us and sharing it with me. I think that if people want to learn more about the Systems Leader, you can find it online at your favorite bookstore, Amazon, local bookstores if you're in Europe or around Europe. Sometimes you'll see it in airports. If you've got a different bookstore that you like, you can find it online there, Barnes & Noble, and others. If you want to buy it in bulk, you can send me a note, robertsiegel.com, and I can put you, a lot of companies have bought it for their employees. And if you go to the Robert E. Siegel website, you'll find more about the research I'm doing on. My Substack also talks a lot about my writings on systems leadership, and now I'm even working on the next book.
What's the next book?
So I'm revisiting the competitive advantage of nations. And, Michael Porter wrote about this 40 some odd years ago. And
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot recently about what's happening in the world today and how do countries compete with each other. And I think what we're seeing is we're entering a window where business and government interests are more closely aligned than I think they have been in several hundreds of years. And that falls into kind of issues of innovation, ideas that shape countries and societies, investment capabilities, and independence. And my thesis is we're seeing an attempt to reverticalize nations. Not that every country can do everything, but this notion that the world is flat that we lived with for so long, that's going away. But globalization is not going away. And how do leaders and countries and business leaders deal with this changing new world?
Yeah. Our president wrote an excellent book about it. I hope you get to interview him about the topic. He was talking about the end of the multi sort of like, the polarization aspect. A lot of the similar topics as you addressed. This has been the Coordination Tax. Thank you, Robert, so much.